Right. So I'll do this. So the topic is pull system for organizational change. The idea is to create an environment that invites and enables members of the organization to drive change. So the book mentions it's incredibly brief. So the way I kind of approach this is I wanted to understand why it was mentioning why I was mentioning and how this kind of related to the literature. And this is coming from something, right? This is sociocracy is creeping into like business management and business processes and organizational design because of a need. And I remember reading about this kind of evolution of organizational design to this point. I didn't remember really well, but it seems like for reasons that were mentioned here, like instability, constant change, dynamic external environments, sort of managerial studies or whatever have been dragged kicking and screaming to understand this concept of, for example, learning organizations and this the need to involve people in a different way in what is the organizational structure and implementation of strategy. So the first thing that I didn't really understand is what is meant by pull systems, because pull systems, it's different. The first thing that comes to mind was manufacturing, because in manufacturing, it's a part of a lean process. It's part of a demand-driven process where you try to keep it lean. You try to avoid getting too much inventory, so you just produce whenever demand needs it. And then in innovation, it's a concept that was predominantly, I think it says in World War II, and it was basically instead of technology push, which basically meant you invent something and then you push it into the market and you find out how to sell it. It was differently in the sense that first you did marketing, and then based on what you found out where people needs and desires, you created technology to provide that solution. What I found about pool, when I think of what refers in sociocracy, I might be wrong. I found this in like the World Economic Forum. It's more like a leadership and management concept, which basically means you invite people to participate. You create this buy-in from people instead of pushing things into, you allow them to, you bring them in. You basically explain, you get buy-in, you bring them into the task or whatever needs to be done. And yeah, basically, and this is based on the fact that people have found out that it's not really productive to just push things onto people, because people don't do what they don't want to do. So the results are not optimal. But when you kind of get people invested in the task that you wanted to do, it's different. And I think that's kind of what this means in creating a pull system for organizational change, is that you allow people to pull. Yeah, basically, people are left to pull things as they need to in order to solve problems in the organization when that's needed. So the first thing that, and this is all that it says about pull systems for organizational change. Change things where there is value in doing so. And there's these 4 bullet points. The first one is bring in patterns that help to solve current and important problems. Then don't break what's already working, meet everyone where they are, and support everyone to make necessary changes in a manageable place. And kind of the rest of the chapter is about clarifying domains, alignment, and all these things. And I just, like, there's so much here, right? Just talking about bringing in patterns. At the end, I have a slide with all the patterns, and it's basically the whole book. So I didn't know even where to start. So I just kind of thought, okay, let's start trying to figure out why would you want to create a pull system for organizational change? Why? And in reality is kind of in the concept of evolving organizations, why even sociocracy or this mode of thinking exists, why to implement something like that. And I started looking into strategic management, and I have some notes here. But basically, so what strategic management tells you is that in any organization, you want to reach a balance between control, which is required for some sort of efficiency and unity, and then you want the balance of delegation, or we can call it autonomy, because people need autonomy to make decisions fast. This is kind of the whole thing that brings managerial literature into kind of the fold of what we're talking about today, is the chaos that surrounds us with the progress of technology and everything. The environments have become constantly changing. Globalization, everything that's happening, just means that change is a constant, and that hadn't happened before. So we went from a sort of a traditional view of the manager trying to create predictable outcomes, to this need for the organization to constantly adapt to external environments and be able to move quick on its feet. And a note that I have here is that in a rapidly changing environment, the absence of delegation results in top executives becoming overloaded with decision making because they struggle to respond rapidly to problems or opportunities. Whereas in learning organizations, structure is created around horizontal workflows, processes, and or networks rather than departmental functions. And so learning organizations are about self-directed teams, and the fundamental work unit is the learning, and is the self-directed teams are the fundamental work unit in the learning organization, and boundaries are eroded because you need to pull from everywhere. Okay, so basically what we're going to talk about today is this this first bullet point, which is bringing patterns that help solve current and important problems. And the reason why I think this is this part, which is the reason why organizations exist, the reason why we kind of do this, is because you need to implement strategies. In order to achieve objectives, you need good strategies. And in order to achieve those objectives, you need to implement those strategies. And implementation of strategies is an iterative process. And it goes from formulation implementation to formulation of the strategy to the implementation. And that is cyclical. And organizations that kind of what they've found out is that organizations that are successful adjust strategies and execution according to feedback from the implementation process itself. So it's kind of these constantly changing thing of what we think we're going to do, or what we decide that we're going to do, and what we do. And in the process of going from one to the other, you are constantly learning and adjusting and implementing feedback that you get from that process. So I think that's kind of what it's meant to bringing in patterns that help to solve current and problems is this learning process of you decide to do something, you create the objective of the formulation and the implementation process is a coherent set of strategy elements and implementation levers. And I saw the strategy elements as drivers, for example, and the implementation levers are things like patterns, are things like processes, like the different templates that are for meetings, for example, the alignment of flows, roles, a lot of different instruments that S3 provides and that are represented in patterns. You can pull those to when that's necessary in this process from we need to do something, how do we do it? And then you figure out, oh, well, we don't have this function, we don't have this, and then we've gone through this process. We need different template for meetings. We need to think about ways of defining roles, redefining or clarifying domains or circles, and all these different things. So I think that's what's primarily meant by bringing in patterns when it's valuable to do so. Yes, Randall.
Oh, sorry. Just making space.
Oh, yeah, I guess are there any questions or comments so far? Let me get rid of my headphones. These things are driving me crazy.
I love it. The idea of strategy is the reason why we all get together in groups is like a little mind blower for me. Like, yeah, of course, it's so that we can implement strategy. Otherwise, just a mob would work. The reason why why we have a framework or we create some type of strategy is to get people in concert or working together in for a goal, and then that goal we can find our feedback and do the iterative process. Yeah, and I guess that's where pull system of work kind of fits into that for sure. That's just a comment, not necessarily a question, but that's where I'm at.
There was something that stood out to me in there when you mentioned control and how there was like this balance between control and autonomy. And I was thinking about how like sociocracy and these S3 patterns, they're almost like a totally different approach to the way control works, because it's not like, and then right after that in the same breath you had the idea that change is always happening. There's nothing you can do about that. Change is the constant. And control was always like, well, we're going to set an outcome and we're going to force change to be our change. We're going to force things to change in a very particular way. And of course, that has all sorts of consequences and collateral damage that it causes. Sure, you got where you were going with your change, you introduced your product or did whatever, but you left a wake of destruction behind you as you did that, from people whose needs weren't met, users who can no longer use this product anymore because you took a particular outcome oriented angle on how it was going to be delivered, all that kind of stuff. But where like sociocracy and S3 seem to like change that, they have this like local kind of a localism built into the structure with the circles and everything. So when there is this authority and control, it's as local as possible, right? So it's just the people who are directly affected who are making those decisions and taking that control for themselves. And so you sort of it's like separating out the element of autonomy from control and making sure that it's clarified for everybody. But then there's this other aspect of it where it recognizes that maybe it's not us in control, and it's not about controlling change. It's about understanding change as it's happening so that we can adjust appropriately. The analogy that comes to mind is like a ship on the ocean. You don't control the wave. Like there's no ship that's got a wave controller. Like the weather's getting bad, I just need to, make these waves come down a bit. It's, oh, I need to design my ship differently for different types of weather, different types of seas. I need to bring the sail in if the weather's coming up. I need to tack into this type of a thing. I need to negotiate this with tools and experience and understanding of what's going on, rather than trying to change the thing itself. I can't change the storm. I can weather it with good practices and lots of information and the ability to know which information counts and which information doesn't as well. And I feel like, yeah, like that's how they're breaking that control concept down and making it accessible.
Respond to what's happening. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and there's an S3 term for that. Priest, James Priest uses it all the time. Nori, can you think of it? It's like respond to their environment, and it may come from like systems theory, like the fundamental unit is like a unit that can respond autonomously to its environment or something. Is that ringing a bell with anyone? Which then the pull system works, because they can, you can see, to use the boat analogy, it's just like, oh yeah, my sea is calm and I'm ready to, drive towards the objective and I can pull on more work. Oh, the sea is rough. I can't pull on more work. I have to change my tack. I have to go in the opposite direction, et cetera, et cetera.
I don't know if it's exactly, but I did find I don't know if it's the role, but I did found the role defined as part of like a learning organization unit as opposed to a task. And to what Jeremy said, it's kind of funny because every quote I found the wording just kind of clashed with everything that we talked about. While being related, and when I said control just sounds like such a negative word. But the part that I think was important to me is the control needed to achieve efficiency and unity of direction. And effectiveness and efficiency are principles of sociocracy, and unity of direction. Sociocracy literally talks a lot about alignment, a lot about aligning flow. So I think it is a lot about perspective and context, I think, and I understand that in certain contexts, traditional managerial context, control is about kind of putting people or putting processes or things into things where you can measure precisely and effectively and control things in a way that you kind of force force things into predefined boxes or whatever. But I think taking into context, control in this case, as we see it, for example, as I see it, is just basically whatever is needed or the minimum needed to align, because I do think that circles, domains, roles, everyone needs, there is a certain control that you need. Otherwise, just kind of chaos reigns. But anyways, so just to say that it was funny how looking at this same texts a few years later with a different perspective, words kind of sounded differently, or I try to reconcile what they were saying, because they're trying to get to what we are, basically. A lot of the books, as they kind of explain the evolution of organizational design, organizational theory, they really try to get to this point of not necessarily sociocracy. I think sociocracy is kind of a bridge too far for managerial literature, but they do talk a lot about this need for or horizontal workflows, for roles as dynamic social systems, as parts of the dynamic social systems, about organizations being social structures. The reason why organizations are, or what is an organization, defined as people and their relationships with each other, which I found like it's kind of like weird, but anyways, whatever. I don't want to stay here too long, but so this is kind of what I was getting at, is to me, the reason why you need to bring in patterns, the reason why sociocracy kind of explains this pull system for organizational change as bringing in patterns, and the other 3 bullet points, which is basically what, don't break what's already working. Okay. And that is related to other specific system parts of the S3. Same with the meet people where they are. I think that relates a lot to the way that work is described in sociocracy, and just kind of not overloading and allowing people, which is also meet them where they are. And Jeremy has mentioned this before, which I found interesting, is the organization kind of adapts and evolves around the person, not the person around the organization. So it's this circle, it's a cycle of, if you don't think about an organization as a static structure, if you think about an organization as something made of people and relationships, then it's by definition fluid, and it's constantly changing and evolving, and that requires a different mindset, I think. So you have organizational change, which we're talking about, a pull system for organizational change, but you also have organizational design and organizational structure. These are 3 elements. How they work together is how you implement strategy. You create a structure, and that structure is designed, and you need something to kind of affect that change, because your structure and your design need to be somewhat flexible to be constantly adapting to what might be happening externally for learning organizations, or whatever we're talking about. So talking about organizational structure first, which is the what in this case. The why being we need a pull system for organizational change because organizations are dynamic entities, whatever you want to call it. They need to be constantly changing and adapting. And so a pull system with the 4 bullet points that Sociocracy kind of points out sort of makes sense in that concept. And I'm just pulling my notes here. So yeah. So what the structure and kind of what I was talking about, what is an organization? And organizations are goal-directed and designed as deliberately structured and coordinated activity systems linked to the external environment. I thought that was a pretty good definition, and it's quoted because it's a quote, it's a literal quote. But it kind of speaks to this. I have notes here. Sorry. Where is this? Organizations are made up of people and their relationships with one another. An organization exists when people interact with one another, and there is evidence of the importance of this in the growing emphasis on empowering employees by increasing opportunities to learn and contribute as they work together towards common goals. And again, this kind of concept of managerial literature really trying to get there, really trying to get to this point where they are understanding organizations as opposed to, like, for example, scientific management theory, which was so really restrictive and really specific about what a task was and how to organize and what a person was, basically just a cog in the machine, to this really social concept of what an organization is. So I try to put together side by side how strategic management literature or organizational theory looks at organizations, like, which is on the left side, which is a relatively stable arrangement and division of responsibilities, tasks, and people within an organization. And on the right side is what Sociocracy says, which is the same objective. It's basically to make better use of time, energy, and resources. That's the reason why we get organized. That's the reason why because we want to achieve an objective with the least amount of time and resources spent. We organize into groups of people with a common goal. And that way we can divide work, we can specialize, we can do all these different things. So why would we create organizational structure? Because structures allow for information flows. And what I think circles, domains, roles allow is for something that is a little bit further down, is the concept of delegating the knowledge that needs to be created and allowing that to flow to those that need to do something with that information. Because not everything, and one of the things that I thought was interesting was surveys, studies that find that organizations have a much easier time generating knowledge than implementing knowledge. That's one of the main reasons why this kind of evolution of managerial theory or organizational theory has happened, is because people fail a lot in executing strategies or implementing ideas itself, right? And there was a survey, I have it here, that's 46% of companies said that they were good or excellent at generating new knowledge, but the same survey, only 14% reported launching products based on the application of new knowledge. And they call that the knowing doing gap. And 2 reasons why this kind of this might be happening is that strategy formulation isn't shared with stakeholders that are integral to rolling out the strategy, and the failure to identify whether appropriate implementation levers are in place. And again, this to me kind of relates to, sorry, I'm not stopping, so I'm just going to check the chat. To what we talk about all the time, the reason why Sociocracy sometimes kind of, to me, it's something that is really abstract, really kind of weird in terms of management and processes. but it kind of is, I understand why it exists, why it can be effective, is this necessity to involve everyone in the company, in the organization, in the implementation, in the creation and formulation of strategy and implementation. That is necessary, but it is extremely hard. And traditional managerial practices don't really create that space or that those methods or tools, as far as I'm concerned, as far as I know at least, to really do that, to create an environment like not even democracy does that, like where you need the representative democracy the same way in companies there are hierarchies because people on the top decide and just delegate to the bottom. And apparently, not apparently, but what we found is that that's not always the case. Bottom up seems to be mostly something that's very useful. And I'll show an example, a case study of something very simple that was done, and I think spoke to what we mean when we say that we want to, or when it needs to be clarifying, when we need to clarify domains and the relationship that it has with roles. And so basically the second thing that I thought about organizational structure that was interesting is that it spells out decision rights, which is the policies that tells individuals who is responsible for generating information, which I thought, okay, that sounds like proposal forming, and then who is authorized to act on it, which to me is what circles and roles do. They specify areas of autonomy or action, I guess, and roles does the same. Like what we found with Randall's presentation on domains and roles is that it generates this kind of circle, is this area of autonomy where people are responsible but also have freedom to act. So, any questions so far? I see a lot of comments. Let me just. It sounds like an approach having lightweight strategy, focusing the work and being ready to pull in what's needed to achieve that work, pulling some additional stuff when it's needed to make progress, organizational learning from failure as well as success. People can execute on knowledge. I don't see how any organization, people can execute on knowledge. I don't see how any organization can. Yeah, Harsha.
So just based on the system, I'm getting the feeling that there are absolutely no restrictions. Say, for example, someone is a part of a domain. They can choose to take the work. They can choose not to take the work. They can choose to be in the domain. They can choose not to be in the domain at any point in time. Am I getting that right?
Not really. I think that S3 is kind of it is structured in the sense that, from my experience, at least when we've done domain and circle forming, people do make like a commitment to, once you design the domain, and we're going to get to organizational design and define the domain, and that creates kind of the circle. There are certain responsibilities that need to be filled, certain tasks that need to be done, certain roles that need to be filled. And I think that the people that kind of create that circle take the commitment or the responsibility to taking on those roles in order to fulfill whatever needs to be done toward that domain. Yes, Nori.
Yeah, especially when you get to the level of roles. I think when somebody becomes and agrees to be a role keeper, you're stepping into a set of commitments, responsibilities, as well as the autonomous rights of that role. And just, I think the contract is with the circle, and then higher up, the greater circle is, those are the people that you're committing to, saying, I'm going to do this according to this either proposal, role that you're filling, or like S3 is filled with agreements, and those agreements are the kind of those accountability bits. And the people that hold you accountable are at that whatever level that you're committing to that's happening. That could be a circle as a whole being accountable to the higher level organization based on its delegation, or it could be a role, or it could be a proposal that somebody makes, the results of that. So yeah, so it's not that people are in and out and wishy-washy and kind of doing whatever they want. It is like there's a whole bunch of agreements that happen in S3 that kind of dictate how we act and what we're responsible for and who we're accountable to.
It feels like the moment of creating a role is a perfect moment for pulling organizational change when you're trying to get some shit done. Pardon my French. When you're trying to get things done and you recognize a need for a role, you could pull in that role creation at the moment.
I think that's kind of the initial thing, is recognizing when there is value on bringing in S3 patterns and implementing them. And sometimes I feel a tension of trying to do that in a vacuum, but I can definitely see how when you're in a structure that is predefined, sort of like a traditional, you can, and maybe this is a good time to bring up this case study. It's really just textbooks, just millions of case studies all the time. So one was this firm called Air Liquide. I don't remember exactly what they do. I think that's oxygen or natural gas. They simply decided to do a little bit of reorganizing, restructuring, and what they did was they began putting their personnel at client sites, and gave autonomy to decision-making autonomy to those employees at client sites. And what the result of that, which I found like a clarifying of domains and sort of a redefining of the role of that personnel, is that they discovered all these different services and products that they could create because their personnel were directly involved with client problems, for example, at the people that they eventually, like through a distributor or through whatever retailer, were selling that product. They had firsthand information about what the pains of the customer were, or simply the client, their distributor or whatever there was, because the examples are handling hazardous materials, troubleshooting quality control systems. And this kind of just led me to what this translates into organizational structure in S3 is this pattern, or this kind of instruction of when do you clarify domains. And I thought that the quote was really interesting, is when you identify that stakeholders have differing assumptions about the domain of an existing role, position, team, department, unit, or even about the domain of the organization as a whole. And in this case, for example, I thought, okay, so who are the stakeholders? The stakeholders are the clients, the managers in the company, and maybe even the clients of the clients. And they probably, at some point, maybe the distributor, maybe the personnel from Air Liquide was coming into the client, giving them products, and that person, the manager from that client, was constantly complaining to them about stuff, or just in conversation. And I saw that a lot in the book Reinventing Organizations. There is a lot of this relationship forming that goes on between people that you don't even, like, you just think of them as someone that does one task, like the driver that carries the gas from the propane tank to the restaurant. But that person talks and has an intimate knowledge of probably a lot of the problems that go in the day-to-day of any organization. So by just the simple fact of kind of giving that person, that driver, the freedom to go back to the office and say, these are some of the problems I found. This is some of the just kind of gossiping, pretty much. They found all these different uses. So I thought that was so interesting that there's two ways of reaching this. They see this as a restructuring, it's just a genius move, innovative. But at the same time, sociocracy, this is the name of the game, right? You assume that is how you create it. And I think that was kind of really interesting to, and at the same time, this might go unnoticed in S3 as well, right? So you maybe need to be on the lookout of those same signals. The fact that everyone can do everything might lead to some sort of in this case, because they were in traditional management, this was super valuable. This might not be that much if everyone can do or everyone has this same hierarchy. Maybe that doesn't flow up to the surface. Or anyway, my point being, that pattern, this little quote to me is something that in companies, million-dollar companies has created. I cannot imagine how much value was created just from like these 1, 2, 3 different services that they came up with one person at a client site bringing problems back to the company. Yes, Noreen.
So that's super interesting that whenever, like, this is like when to clarify domains, and just like linking it back to our previous conversation, a role is a domain of one. And what Randall said, emergently creating roles on the fly as the need arises. And the speed of that seems very appealing. One thing I am curious about though is roles are domains, and domains are created through a consent mechanism where there is this larger circle that is consenting and delegating authority down to a role. I think one of our value adds that we can do at Odin is to figure out how do we make that as quick and agile as possible? What's the bare minimum we need to define and consent to a role to get it launched and then refine it over time? Like what's good enough for now, safe enough to try for a role? And how do we can we do that in 5 minutes in a meeting to say, hey, I think we need this role. Here's the driver. Here's the key responsibilities. Here's the expected metrics. Here's how we're going to evaluate it. Tying it back to peer development and peer feedback. You need those kind of, how do we know that somebody's good in the role, and how do we provide them feedback and have enough information in a role very quickly that we can create them without spending weeks or months trying to design a role and then going through the whole consent process over a number of meetings. And it's yeah, how do we make that really fast and lightweight? And what's the minimum viable role? What's needed to make all of them?
Being willing for it to not look like it's good enough, but we can still go make an impact with it not being good enough.
Yeah.
And sorry.
I was just gonna say, yeah, that what Nori was saying about how to get something that is the minimum viable, I think then what gets in the way of that is the perfectionism and saying, oh, it has to be, how to move quickly without sort of tearing the house down. That's all I was saying.
And it ties back to one of your earlier slides of iterative and interconnected. Those are magic words to me. And good enough for now, safe enough to try really feeds into that iterative nature. So what's that first seed? And then how do we know that it's interconnected and requires consent from the larger group and all of that kind of stuff?
I literally bought Emergent Strategy in paperback because I don't read it. I don't read on iPad. I just realized that I really hate, it's painful, but
such a great book.
And I love it that it ties everything to nature. But what I wanted to say is that we've spent so much time crafting circles and domains, but if a domain is a role and a role is in a domain, what if the part that makes a circle domain effective is that role? I feel like that's where it might lead to insights and knowledge and, I don't know, productivity, but results, is when people have a role to keep and they feel responsible. That's kind of what drove me to kind of go a little bit deeper and try to really give a little bit more than just coming up with 4 bullet points and try to tie them up to patterns, is because I felt a little bit of a responsibility, and this is kind of the grind I have the gripe or whatever it's called with you guys, because I see Newman's, I see Nori's, Randall's, and Jeremy's presentation, and I feel we all share the same role, kind of. And I did feel that responsibility of, okay, I need to bring that same amount of value to the study group. It feeds on itself, and it is iterative, and it is interdependent. And so maybe it's not just, maybe the most important part about defining domains and creating circles is to get to the part where we create roles and role keepers. But anyways, time, oh, okay. So we looked at organizational structure, and I wanted to talk a lot about organizational design because I saw this and I thought, Jeremy, I know that he's mentioned chaos theory a bunch of times, and I thought that was really cool. And it kind of goes into this mentality of stopping, not seeing organization as a mechanism or a machine, and this view of seeing it more like an organism, almost a living thing, something that adapts and is complex. I saw non-linear. I saw numerous interconnections and divergent choices. And in my head, it was screaming, Jeremy, and I'm sure he said it more than once. So I thought, okay, I'm getting somewhere here. The first time in the presentation, I thought I wasn't so lost. And interestingly enough, that was right before going into learning organizations. And the whole concept behind that is they are trying to teach these massive behemoths of companies to become agile and responsive to dynamic environments. And I think Newman mentioned the case of Kodak and how they just missed on billion-dollar opportunities because they were too set in their ways. And so there's such a huge incentive to figure out what's wrong. And it turns out what's wrong is that they kind of become stale and massive and heavy. And so they are obligated to come up with this kind of more holistic process, which I find absolutely hilarious. But so they get to the point of learning organizations, and this is kind of where I left off is how organizational design is viewed, and again relates to at first learning organizations. It says, in order to make the quick decisions, many organizations are becoming learning organizations. And the principle of learning organizations is that communication and collaboration are actively promoted, so everyone is engaged in identifying and solving problems. This enables the organization to continuously experiment, improve, and increase its capability. And again, peer feedback, we just talked about peer review, peer development, iterative processes. I think the different meeting formats of sociocracy kind of go through this flow of what this means of strategy formulation, implementation, and in the in-between, there is this clear sort of channel of information flow that allows a quick iteration, quick experimentation. I think the being open and flexible for failure and being open to receiving and giving feedback and all the culture that goes along with sociocracy is the kind of thing that you need in order for this to go quick, for people to not be afraid to try, not be afraid to bring information up to the surface and communicate it to everyone else. So kind of everyone is fully aware of what's happening. Anyways, and learning organizations are based on equality, open information, little hierarchy, and a culture that encourages adaptability and participation, enabling ideas to bubble up from anywhere that can help the organization seize opportunities and handle crises. The essential value is problem solving, as opposed to traditional organizational design, which was to create predictable outcomes. So it seems to me like sociocracy is kind of MBA for learning organizations a little bit. So that was interesting to me. And this is kind of I think Newman mentioned it at the beginning around systems thinking and systems design. And I think learning organizations follows this concept of open systems thinking, which is again, previously or traditional organizations thought of organizations as these kinds of isolated and everything was internal looking, how the company could be more efficient, how things could be more controlled, how everything could be measured more precisely. And open systems makes it more obvious that companies do not act on a void. They are always subject to external environments that are always changing. If organizations are machines that capture resources, transform them, and then export them and output stuff like that, then they always need to be able to find resources, identify and find resources. And that need, if the external environment is always changing, that means that the organization needs to be always changing and adapting and learning if they are to survive, which to me is kind of like an animal. So that was pretty cool. Yeah, so find and obtain needed resources, interpret and act on environmental change, dispose of outputs, coordinate internal activities in the face of environmental disturbances and uncertainty. Yeah, and that gets me to the 5 elements of organizational design, all kind of relate in some way to sociocracy, but so far I've gotten to structure and tasks. And structure is what I talked about in the beginning, that in a rapidly changing environment, if you go through a traditional hierarchy, this means that the people at the top are going crazy, but because there's so many things that are changing and they would need to go to the bottom, trying to figure out what's going on and then bring it back. And that just it's a lengthy process. In learning organizations, structure is created around horizontal workflows, processes or networks rather than departmental functions. And again, self-directed teams. This means that you create these, and again, this goes to system thinking, subsystems that are able to find out and fix problems by themselves without having to go through this process, up and down process. And the final thing was tasks, which in like scientific management theory, a task was something that was, I remember the guy, which was the guy that invented scientific management, is whatever. And it was in when you had like Henry Ford, the line thing, like McDonald's. And I remember that there was the story of someone that his job was to have a clock, what's it called? A clock, and measuring in seconds how much it took people time to do certain tasks. And they were detailed to the last thing, step by step. And people were just thought of as machines. And then going to this other thing where it's role. And when I thought, and it's a literal word role, I thought, okay, that's really interesting. And it's defined as something that is part of a dynamic social system. Again, organization says just a group of people and relationships. And that's where I'm at. So I apologize that it's not complete. And I need to get to implementation levers, which is organizational structure, circles and roles, systems that I think are related to S3 pattern, and processes, which are like sense making, meeting formats, organizing work. And the part on the left is that kind of bridge that needs to be a gap between generating knowledge and implementing it. And the difficulty in doing so is, I think, kind of the ethos behind sociocracy is how do you create that system, just like the scientific method of allowing that experimentation and learning constantly. That needs to be a daily, day-to-day task instead of something that is such a lengthy, time-consuming, resource-intensive process that goes on in like a hierarchical organization. Sorry, I think my voice is dry, so that means I've been talking for way too long. Any questions?
That
No,
was
that was
awesome.
great. Yeah,
That was
super,
awesome.
super wonderful.
I feel like I was on a tour of the Grand Canyon, like was being led along, and it's like, so here's the lookout. There's little squirrels here. Check those guys out. That guy there, he's really fat. You can feed him if you want. And then here's like the sign that's going to tell you where we're going. Here's the beginning of the trail. And oh, by the way, here's the Grand Canyon. It was probably formed by like an electric magnetic arc blasting through the earth. And now I'm left with like, man, I want to know more about like Ragnarok's lightning now. It's this is yeah, gosh, it's so deep. It just goes so far. And it's like S3 is devious, man. They put 4 lines on there and they're like, here's this thing you can do that just like changes absolutely everything about your organization.
The other one was so easy. The reason decision making, it was like, oh, I can do another one. Yeah, it's just really, yeah, it just curiosity kind of wins in these ones, and just finding out that it has so much, it is literally an organizational theory. It's something that's really kind of I find like Square, the fact that it's being driven, not is just the natural conclusion to what is happening, which is this chaotic environment that is happening. And it's really kind of a return to nature. You read Emergent Strategy, and each chapter is like, this is how nature works. There's another book called A Flight of Starlings, which is this Nobel winning physicist, and he talks about how he studied how starlings are able to not crash into each other, how these structures work. And Dr. What is the doctor with singularity? We met Olieru has this paper on emergent engineering, and it's very similar, kind of like neighbors, and just having these macro structures that you have limits. And kind of getting off the subject, but super interesting how things that are seemingly not related, S3 is sort of managerial theory in some way. And it was fascinating to realize that I could find things like role definitions in books about organizational design and things like, you read the rest of the book and it seems like completely contrasting it, and not at all. It's a book teaching managers how to manage employees, how to be good managers. And it turns out the way to be good managers is to not be managerial, way. That's why I found it really interesting, but like, it's a lot. It's a lot. So I wish I had more time. I'm gonna put more thought into this, a little bit more work, and I'll come back soon and explain a little bit more.
Awesome. That Starlings is always, I just found it on Libby app, the library on the internet, and there's an audiobook of it. It's only 3 hours. It might be a really good one to dive into. I love that the pull system of work sort of goes to what Jeremy was talking about. It's just like everything is connected to everything else. And it gets down into the structure, and really great whenever I meet up with Edwards Deming. He's one of my favorites. One of those where an egghead scientist got together with some people with a real problem, and they changed the world. And it was multicultural, and it's just a wonderful, awesome story. I think the story of Edwards Deming is like super incredible. Yeah.
Harsha?
So I just had a question about like the practicality of like pulling this off, in terms of, is the assumption that this organization or whatever forms this connections of people has some resources, whether it be time or money or other things like already existent?
One of the things that the book says when he talks about learning organizations is like a warning that it's easy to talk about building a learning organization, but it's not easy to actually create a learning organization. And kind of like the pitfalls is I remember that when Toyota and people were trying to import Toyota and trying to adopt all these different systems, they just kind of wanted to grab whatever they wanted and saying like this is the Toyota way to do things, and it failed, and they failed to understand that it comes with a cultural context. So to answer your question, you do need time. You like look at us, right? We're trying to implement sociocracy. It's not easy. It takes time. We don't have money though, so maybe you don't need money. But you definitely need people willing to try and experiment. And I think we've all seen that it's not easy, right? It's not straightforward. It's not simple, because I think it's very much, as you can see from theory, it doesn't go along with what you traditionally learn. One of the things that the Emergent Strategy book also tells you is like, we are not taught interdependence, we are taught independence. And so I think it's a difficult concept to grasp, because it's counterintuitive to what we've learned all the time. And I don't expect it to be easy to implement effectively. Like it by definition, it's going to be hard. I'm kind of assuming, because of what we've lived together, and because of what we know about how things are supposed to work. So I think it's a matter of, I think when people are warned about learning Haskell, is that if you've learned object-oriented programming before, it's going to be harder, because you will need to unlearn certain patterns. You will need to stop thinking about things as objects and as functions and stuff like that. And so your brain is already wired one way. And if you want to learn how to use something that is very different approach, it's going to be harder, because you first have to unlearn certain things and kind of accept that that's not the way that it needs to be. So my opinion. Newman?
Yeah. I think I'm curious, and I know that we're going over time. I guess we'll just I think we're planned for an hour, but I'm happy to stick around a little bit. I'm curious because one of the things about each of these patterns, and it's almost like each of them has a prior or a property, and like how easy is it to implement? So if you're, a group, a software design company, somebody that just got a Project Catalyst proposal done, funded, like what would be the step to implement pull system for work? Because I'm curious as to what you think, because when I saw it, I was just like, oh, this is bounties. This is a Kanban board where just everyone in the organization can sort of see it, and that they can grab bits of work when they're ready, like D work. But the way that you framed it, I see it as a much more integral into the organizational design process.
So I think the way that it got convoluted is because I was trying to make sense of it I was trying to find out kind of like what was the relationship with normal managerial theory, or why go this route? Why basically kind of why, and then how. But if you look at it, it's kind of simple. If you're an organization that wants to adopt S3, the first thing you need to do is bringing this going to bring value? Is there value in bringing in an S3 pattern? Is there value in bringing in sense decision making or whatever? And one of the things that it tells you is don't break what's already working. So if there's not a problem, don't bring anything. Meet everyone where they are. I think that means like if people are not ready for this, if there's not going to be buy-in or whatever, you need to kind of get them to the water. What is it? You can bring a horse to water, but you can't make them drink, stuff like that. And don't overload them with work, which seems to be another principle. And that's another pattern that is like create a pull system for work as well, which is like let people pull in from their backlog or something. I wasn't able to really, but I think the kind of the playbook is sort of there. And I went in a tangent probably, but yeah.
Well, no, I think that we got it because you're right. That is, and I think I underlined it in some of the original S3, orientation material, where the place to start is to, make a small change and see, what is, I think they said like sense what's around or take an inventory, which is stuff that resonates with me. But what would be broken in order to like what would not be working for a pull system to add value? Like if you were to,
Like if
like
you think
I'm
of a
just,
case study, if you're thinking our
yeah,
clients are not satisfied, what's going on? And
yeah,
then you would think, okay, let's ask everyone to talk. Let's bring in the chauffeurs instead of
yeah,
just sitting in the office. I think that would be one example of maybe where
okay.
you would want to try a pattern.
Yep. Yeah,
Sure.
and I could see it.
Oh, sorry.
I could see it as like because that's for me the Toyota way, like that die. They got a great word for it, but the cord that people pull, the end on
Oh yeah, to
cord.
stop the yeah,
To
I love
stop it, yeah. And that's it. It sort of fits into the principle of equivalence, meaning that everybody is having experience, meaning that everyone has tension. They see things that are going wrong, and which I think of as like a real true dysfunctional unit is where they see things that are going wrong and they're just like, not my job, not my problem.
Yeah.
I would say something, but it's just going to get me in trouble. It'll be paperwork. Yeah.
Exactly.
Um, but I think the that principle of equivalence, like everyone experiences tension. They all sort of have this, they all have that sort of thing, and that it's valuable. And I think that's it. It's just like every person has a valuable role, perspective on the system, on the organization. And I always think about when I think about this, I always think about, like that they used to put the manager or the president at the top of the pyramid. And I just sort of like I invert the pyramid and put everybody is at the bottom of their own pyramid so that the perspective, like you can turn the system in such that this is everyone has their own unique perspective. It kind of goes back to that, and my last point goes back to that, the five wise men and the elephant. They all are saying the truth when they say the elephant is a rope, they say the elephant is a big rough thing, et cetera, et cetera. So everyone's truth is true, but it needs to have like the system designer people understand that there's a bigger thing going on here. Anyway, that's all. I see
Yeah.
that I see that Harsha and Jeremy's and the hands are up. I want to get to them.
Jeremy?
Gonna try and remember what I was going to say. Riffing just a little bit off of what Newman was saying, like when we talk about this equivalence, it's not just individual equivalence that's being supported with that principle. It's that somehow the organization itself, the collection of everybody together, is also equivalent to people. So it's never more powerful than you are. This is the same principle that got us into hot water with governance for and by the people, right? Because if you don't build the structure that actually reflects that, you're going to have some people with a lot of power over a lot of other people who have given them power, thinking it's okay to do that. What I raised my hand for was thinking about, like, I think about this concept of pull all the time. What is it trying to tell us? It's in Aikido, and yet it's the same thing in Toyota, and it's the same thing in my process for hiring somebody to come help me on the homestead or something like that. Like, it's in all of these things, and all I can think is that it's just a way of viewing our relationships between people via the concept of capacity. Like, it's just asking us to consider capacity when we think about each other. And so you're going to have to, like in an organization, you're going to have mechanisms that reveal people's capacity, because not everybody's going to want to say, I don't have the capacity to do this. I don't want to lose my job. I don't want to be demoted. I don't want to make less because I need, you know, a limit to how much work comes across my table at any given point, but I still want to provide the value that I'm here to provide. So you need ways that reveal capacity. You need ways where you can accommodate people's capacity. That's that meet everyone where they are, right? That's where they are, is their capacity for dealing with anything at any given time. And it changes from maybe day to day, but even hour to hour. I know I used to have a really hard job working out in the Bering Sea, and for about 3 hours after I came on shift, it was a 16-hour shift. For about 3 hours after I came on shift, I was on fire. I could do anything. And then for about an hour, right before my first break, I was toast. I was done. And that every 4 hours was that pattern. And so for that 1 hour before I got my break, it was important not to get loaded up with something at the last moment. And every day you got loaded up with something at the last moment. That was just how that thing functioned. And it was always like break times were always this terrible period where everybody had to work harder, everybody had to do more, everybody had to do everybody else's job for them. It was rough, all because they just didn't recognize this problem of capacity that was happening as people were heading into their break time. So you need to be able to accommodate people's capacity. And then the big thing, the thing that like S3 is all about, that this organizational learning is all about, is you're going to improve capacity. So we're going to, you know, whether it's bottlenecks in an organization or it's which like the period before break time would have been a bottleneck, or it's like some resource that's having trouble getting to every place in the organization where it's needed. Like some places are overfunded, some places are underfunded. That ability to improve capacity by going back to the structure and saying, here's how it's affecting me, or here's how it's affecting our domain. Can you change this so that it works better? Like that's like the most powerful like part of the iteration, where it's where it just supports this idea that capacity is going, we're going to live or die by it. Like if we constrain our capacity until we cannot handle anything, then the organization is going to shrivel up and die. It's going to be caught on the wrong foot on every subject. You see this with a lot of legacy companies that became financial companies. Their capacity to create something in a world that was changing very, very quickly made it so that the only thing they had control over was shareholder finance and just dividends and things like that. And they became all about that. And as a result, you know, if they weren't going to get bought by BlackRock or something, they were done as a company. You know, this happened to GE, this happened to GM, the motor company. So yeah, so I feel it's like, and this comes back to emergent strategy a little bit. There's an old saying that nature to be commanded must be obeyed. And I feel like there's this recognition that people have there's a natural thing going on. You know, I wasn't gold bricking when I needed, you know, an hour before I went on break. I needed some rest. Like I needed things to calm down a little bit for me. Nobody else was either. But there was just something natural going on there. You can only put in so much energy over so much time. Humans only have so many calories in them. And it's that natural recognition of real capacity, not I don't want to say fake capacity, but not like superficial capacity, like the real capacity that you're working with people, and understanding, okay, we'll deal with the bottleneck, we'll improve the situation, but above all, you've also got to reveal in the first place that this is even happening. You know, do people have voice? Can people tell you that this is going on with them?
Jeremy, were you a fisherman in the Bering Sea?
Yeah. Have you ever seen that show, Deadliest Catch? Yeah, I did that for 15 years. That's where I met my wife, actually.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
Oh man, that's so interesting.
I never did it up in Alaska. That was not my bag.
Well, you were in
6 times more
Valdez.
dangerous.
Your specialty was being cold.
Yeah. I wanted to go out on a seining ship, but that's like, they work for like an hour and a half every, once or twice in the season, So,
Yeah.
it's different thing.
I had a friend in
you're
Australia
home for
that went fishing on Tasmania at night.
Oh boy.
I have nothing but respect. That it seems
Yeah.
like the most terrifying thing to be bearing. Like, my wife likes this Reddit subreddit called Heavy Seas. Oh man, there's nothing more terrifying than an angry ocean and those waves and everything. Just,
Yeah. Yeah, I was
um,
in the worst I was ever in was 40-foot seas, and we were all sure we were dying. We were all sure that was it. We were done.
Yeah. It's
Oh,
apparently
God.
6 times more dangerous than coal mining as an occupation.
I believe it.
wow. Oh. Anyways,
Mhm.
Harsha?
I just wanted to take the conversation back to like where Newman started. So, is it fair to say that all work can be traced back to a specific tension? And if a role is created, that means the role can be traced back to a specific tension?
I thought all work, no play makes Homer. What was it? What was the word? It's in The Shining. All work, no play makes
A
something.
dull boy. A
A
dull
A
dull
boy.
dull
boy, yeah.
boy.
I think
Yeah.
it's Johnny.
Johnny.
Johnny's home.
That's Jack Nicholson. But Homer does a spoof on The Simpsons.
Right.
The same. Sorry, Harsha. It's just you said all work, and I just thought, oh, no play makes Johnny a dull boy. Sorry.
Can work or roles, can every bit of work or task be, trace it back through the system to a driver, to an organizational driver?
Well, he specifically said tension.
Attention, yeah.
And then the question would be, could you come up with an example of a role or a domain that was not based on attention? And my understanding of tension is always that it's like your individual feeling about something, and that it's a tension when you're able to give it like an objective framing and able to express it to others so that they understand what you're saying. Because a tension that nobody else understands, it would be hard to qualify that as an actual organizational tension, or a tension an organization could understand, I should say.
Tension is defined as a personal experience, a symptom of dissonance between an individual's perception of a situation and their expectations or preferences.
Okay, yeah.
And if you got the book open, look and see, because it does, like, in the surfacing tension pattern, there is like you can go through the process and see that it's not an organizational, the tension comes from somewhere else. Like, I stubbed my toe and now I'm angry, and it's because you stubbed your toe. It's not because you're at work and blah, blah, blah. Or the tension is that at hour 3 I'm exhausted, and that's really when my break needs to be. And it could be that there's another driver that goes beneath it. Yeah.
Navigate via attention says, pay attention to tension you experience in relation to the organization, investigate the cause, and pass on any organizational drivers you discover to the people accountable for the appropriate domain. Challenges and opportunities for an organization are revealed by people bringing awareness to the reasons why they experience tension. To discover driver, investigate what stimulates tension and describe what's happening and what's needed. Sometimes an inquiry reveals misconceptions and the tension goes away. So I guess that means it's yeah, right? Yeah. So a job, a task, and I don't know if we talk about tasks or role or just roles in S3, but I would say, yeah, right? Because basically what this says is that either the tension is a misconception and then it just needs to be clarified, or the tension is a driver for change, in which case you need to describe what's happening and what's needed. what's needed, it sounds like a job or
Yeah.
work, right?
Yeah, the tension leads to the driver, and then the driver becomes kind of that guiding thing for why the role exists. And just like any other domain, it's like
And
everything starts-
presumably not every tension becomes a driver.
Right.
right. Like
Mhm.
Roberto said, it could be a misunderstanding. Attention could be handled by just talking about it and clarifying things.
Yeah. I thought that there was something about it being like not something that the organization can address. It's like out of scope. Like there were
Oh,
some,
There are
Yeah.
some tensions that are out of scope,
yeah,
and then you drop them because they're not in the sphere of what the organization is.
right.
So, so is there like a difference between organizational tension and individual tensions? Is it not like if collectively everyone agrees this individual tension is important enough to address, then it becomes the organizational tension? No?
Are there organizational tensions?
Yes, that lead to the organizational drivers. There's that whole flow chart around how to process tensions,
Mhm.
and becomes like it says, and there's that flow chart and that says, can you assign it to some circle that exists? And there's actually a yes or no decision point where those things get thrown out because they're not dealable by the organization.
I'm just being aware of the time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
We took it, we talked it out today. That's great.
Apologies in advance for those of you watching the video.
All right. Oh boy.
All right. Thanks for listening, guys.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was really well done.
Yeah, that's great.
Thanks, Roberto.